In the depths of the pandemic, wages, sick leave, and emergency pay sometimes meant disparate voices singing from a similar hymn book. However, now that it's election time, the differences among the parties that remained and their promises for the recovery to come give both unionized and non-unionized workers much to consider. Let's find out more. And as is our custom here, we're going to introduce our guests from furthest away to closest to our studio, starting in the nation's capital with Angela McEwen. She's senior economist at CUPE National. In Hamilton, Ontario, Joe Mancinelli, LiUNA International Vice President and Regional Manager. In the downtown core of the provincial capital, Rocco Rossi, President and CEO of the Ontario Chamber of Commerce. And in North York, Lori Nanskevell, First Vice President and Treasurer of OPSEU, the Ontario Public Service Employees Union. And it's great to have you four on our program for a look at who's going to win the Labour vote in this campaign. And before we dive into the four major party platforms, just to get your feedback on those, let's just do a little background here. Joe Mancinelli, to you first. How successful do you think the current government has been in courting the Labour vote?
Well, Steve, I think they've been very successful. I think Monty McNaughton, in particular, Minister of Labour, has done an exceptional job of working very closely with a number of the skilled trades and a number of the other unions right across the province. So, his track record is impeccable, probably one of the best labor ministers and ministers of skills and development that we've had in a long time.
Angela McEwen, what would you say?
I'd have to say that the record is very different for workers who aren't in the skilled trades. I would say they cut the minimum wage as soon as they came into office. And so that hurt low-wage workers. They got rid of equal pay for part-time workers, temporary workers. They've recently carved gig workers out of employment standards. So there are a whole bunch of workers. They have Bill 124, which is limiting total compensation increases in the broader public sector to 1% increases when inflation in Ontario is 7%. And these are workers who've been on the front lines, education workers, healthcare workers. And so, yeah, I think that while they may have created some jobs building highways, broadly, we wish they'd have built something else.
Let me ask
Lori
Nanskevell.
That could have created jobs for the trades.
Right. More to come on that. Lori Nanskevell, you represent OPSEU, which, of course, represents so many people in the Ontario Public Service. How do you think this government has done in terms of its relationship with Labour?
Thanks. I think that the Ford government's claim to be working for workers is really just talk, and their actions don't support that. Ontario spends less per capita on public services than any other province, and we've had the fewest hospital beds per capita of the province, and we're tied actually with Mexico, with the lowest hospital beds in the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. Funding to school boards fell by $800 per student over the 4 years, and the PC government scrapped the minimum wage when they first came into office and made workers wait years for that to be increased. They also paid private companies $22.4 million to run a paid sick leave program instead of providing permanent paid sick days. And WSIB under Ford will provide $1.5 billion in surplus funds back to employers at the expense of injured workers. So we really don't feel as though the Ford government has been here for workers.
All right. Rocco Rossi, you're kind of, as the head of the Chamber of Commerce, our sort of designated voice of business here. And I guess I should ask you off the top, the Progressive Conservative Party traditionally has been seen as the sort of pro-business party in the province of Ontario among all those on offer. Has that been the case under Doug Ford, in your view?
Well, there's no question that there have been many positive developments despite very difficult last 2 years. But I think at the end of the day, what all parties have to answer is how we're going to grow. Because so long as we continue to trail all of the Great Lakes states by some $16,000 per capita in economic production, we simply will not be able to grow services and wages to the level that all of us would love to see. And so the focus really needs to be on how we improve productivity, how we grow as an economy to be able to achieve the goals that we all want.
Do you think this government spent enough time thinking about that, Rocco?
I think there's never enough time spent on that, quite frankly, and so we continue to push on a number of fronts. And clearly, the pandemic was an extraordinary time, and it is by no means, much as we'd all love it to be in the rearview mirror, there are still enormous impacts that continue to be felt and that need to be taken into account as we think about any new cost increases in the face of existing pressures that have already been laid out in terms of inflation and other cost increases.
All right, with all of that background in place, let's now take a look at the four-party platform, starting in order of precedence in the last House, therefore with the Progressive Conservative Party. And Sheldon, if you'd bring this graphic up, we can go through this. Now, of course, the parties have got a lot to say. We're just putting up some of the bullet points here. In the PC plan, $114.4 million over 3 years for what they're calling a skilled trades strategy. Increase the general minimum wage to $15.50 an hour on October 1st of this year. Expand college degree granting in applied fields. $15 million plus over 3 years in the Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. And of course, they got $25 billion for highways in there as well, which will presumably provide a lot of work for a lot of people. Joe Mancinelli, up to you first again. What do we think of this PC plan?
Well, clearly representing 90,000 construction workers in the province of Ontario and being the largest construction union in the country, clearly that kind of infrastructure dollars being injected into the economy is very favorable for our members and their families. So very important information that's come out of that, and previous information that we received earlier on, like the $40 billion for hospitals and long-term care facilities, and a number of other projects like $23 billion towards schools as well. Very, very important because, during the pandemic, it was the construction industry that kept on working and keeping the economy going. And we just need to keep on going in order to inject funds into the economy because the ripple effects affect not just construction workers, it affects the corner store at the corner and other manufacturing and a whole bunch of other things that our members purchase as well.
Angela, there's one Labour leader of significance who gives a thumbs up to this current government. What say you?
And I think that when his members are having jobs created, that makes absolute sense, right? From a broader economic analysis, I think that if we're concerned about productivity and productivity growth, we should look at what those jobs are created. So I absolutely support investing in infrastructure and creating those jobs for those construction workers, but let's do it with the biggest bang for our buck. So rather than using public-private partnerships that cost more over the long term and deliver less, let's build it publicly. So rather than public-private partnerships for highways, let's build publicly owned hospitals, schools, childcare centers. Let's use that money to build public long-term care homes. We saw during the pandemic, private long-term care homes actually had much worse outcomes for workers. So let's focus on what we know works and what we know is actually more affordable over the long run, which is public infrastructure. And the other piece, I think, is that it's obviously not just those skilled trade workers that we need to worry about if we're thinking about productivity. Education is huge for productivity. So kindergarten to grade 12, last year they underspent the education budget by $1.3 billion. If we're concerned about productivity, we need to be investing in youth. We need to be investing in post-secondary education, whether that's for apprenticeships or for universities. That's how we grow our economy, and that's how we get a more productive future for everyone.
Rocco, maybe I'd direct you towards the provisions for minimum wage there, which the government says will go up to $15.50 an hour. Of course, more to come on the other parties on that regard. But do you think that will act as a disincentive for business to hire more people if that were to take place?
Look, the vast majority of our members pay well in excess of the minimum wage already. And there is a war for talent out there. So it's rarely the arbitrary level that's set by any government. The market really sets what you're going to need to pay in order to get the workers. What we need to be focused on is how do we build an economy where there are as few minimum wage jobs as possible, and I agree with Angela. Look, education is crucial. Apprenticeship is crucial. I wish I had known when I was going through school that one day OPG would be paying welders at the Darlington refurbishment between $150,000 to $200,000 a year. Skilled trades are a phenomenal pathway to real middle-class existence that can afford houses, et cetera. And the work that Joe and his members do on the training front to really lift up particularly underrepresented groups, whether it's Indigenous, whether it's women in trades, is really going a long way to making a fundamental difference in the life that we want for all of our friends, family, and neighbors.
Lori, how about you on this PC plan? Thoughts?
Thanks. I think some of it is too little too late. Of course, we'll take any increases to minimum wage, but really, had the plan be struck from the get-go, they would have been far better off than they are right now. Infrastructure does need to happen. So similar to what we've heard already from Angela, I do support that. But I think when you're looking at public services and public sector, we all need public services, and that is so critically underfunded that it really needs to be a focus for this government, and it's not. So we need a government that will provide the focus and dedication to our public services.
Well, we'll see if any of the other parties meet that test as we go on to talk about them. Actually, you know what? Hang on a sec. Before I leave the PCs, I do have to ask one last question, and that is, who do I want to put this to? Okay, Joe, I'm going to pick on you for this one here. Do you not see something kind of ironic in the fact that many of the policies that Doug Ford is running on right now, he opposed in the first 2 years of his premiership, and in fact, many of these policies which the previous government had brought in, he overruled in the first couple of years of his premiership. What do you think?
Well, to be fair, I think any government that comes into office has to assess, where their priorities are. And, if you look at a number of the labor bills that have to do with skills development, apprenticeship, infrastructure, et cetera, clearly they had to listen to the public and to organizations like ours, like LiUNA, in order to assess what their priorities are. And so in all fairness, in the very beginning of their campaign, they opposed certain things and then changed their minds. And I'm actually quite happy that the Ford government, Doug Ford and Monty McNaughton, listened very carefully to the needs of Ontario workers. And I'm quite happy with that.
Angela, do I hear you trying to get in there?
Yeah, sorry. So they cherry picked what they reversed on. So they increased the minimum wage, but they left out the key pieces like equal pay for temporary workers or for part-time workers. And so they're still leaving behind a whole bunch of workers. They're taking money out of the WSIB fund for injured workers. So they've picked some workers that they've decided, to try to help them, I think, make them look better, to try to make this show, this mirage that they're worker friendly. But they've really only cherry picked a few workers to do that. And they've really left lots of us behind. If you talk to any healthcare worker or any education worker, this government has done nothing for them. They're overworked, they're underpaid, they're stressed out. They keep getting promises made, like the personal support workers that were promised a $3 increase. There was a bill rushed through the House, and there's nothing in that bill that actually increases wages for personal support workers. So they've had these promises made and then their hopes dashed.
Okay,
so over and over again, we've seen these huge promises that aren't fulfilled.
Okay, I'm going to jump in because I do want to make sure that we get enough time to talk about all the platforms. So let's move on and talk about the NDP platform at this point. And again, I'll ask our director, Sheldon Osmond, to bring the graphic up, where the NDP plans to raise the minimum wage to $20 in the year 2026. 10 permanent personal emergency leave days for all workers is a part of the NDP plan. They would create Ontario benefits to cover all workers, including those in part-time, casual, app-based or contract jobs, the so-called gig economy. And they would repeal Bill 124, which is, of course, this bill that was so controversial in as much as it holds public servants to a maximum of 1% wage salary compensation in collective bargaining. Okay, Rocco Rossi, to you first. What do you think of what you've heard here?
Well, look at on the sick days, as you know, Steve, during the pandemic, we at the Ontario Chamber of Commerce supported the initiative for 10 days because we're facing a pandemic, so long as it was government paid, taxpayer paid. And that's a crucial element because, quite frankly, just as not all workers are alike, not all businesses are alike, not all businesses have the margins that RBC or Amazon or Shopify have. And so if this is intended as a social safety net, then it needs to be publicly funded so that it's paid for on the basis of a progressive income tax, as opposed to hitting those who can least afford it. On the $20, while the sticker shock is a big one for many smaller members in our chamber network, one thing I will grant the NDP on it is that they're talking about predictable increases over time to get to that level. And I think that is a key thing that we ask of all parties is build it on the basis of tied to economic growth. Unfortunately, not just to inflation, much as I would love inflation to be solved by picking a number where you would put wages. The problem is if you don't get productivity increases, all that's going to do is increase inflation further, and you just end up on a wheel that doesn't move anyone further ahead. But be predictable so that people can plan and can build it in over time, because it's suddenness and unpredictability, which is the enemy of business investment.
Lori, your view on the NDP offer?
Thanks. I think it makes sense. I think that this is what looks out for the best of workers. When we're talking about the $20, as just mentioned, it's a progressive increase, and the economy is going to improve when you pay working class people more. We are going to be spending the money back into the local economies, and you're going to start seeing it back in your businesses. When you pay rich people more money, it doesn't stay here. Another yacht or going into the coffers that you have offshore or something else. But when you pay working class people, you're going to see that money come back. So I think that is the absolute right thing to be doing with the NDP.
Out of curiosity, Lori,
Yes.
curiosity, does OPSEU intend to endorse the NDP in this campaign?
We support the NDP.
Because your predecessor, Smokey Thomas, I don't think ever did, but there's a new sheriff in town, and is the new sheriff going to? Yes. The new sheriff is going to say
OPSEU
endorse.
doesn't endorse any political party, but we do support the NDP.
Gotcha. Okay, Joe Mancinelli, your view of the NDP campaign?
Well, it's hard to argue with any of the points there, and I just want to make it very clear that LiUNA's on record as opposing Bill 124. We feel that all workers should have the right to negotiate through a collective agreement and come up with a monetary agreement that makes sense. 1% is not enough, and we're all experiencing the hardships of inflation right now, unprecedented levels of inflation that requires a lot more than 1% in order to even to just be level, let alone get an increase. So, we're not in favor of 124, but I still believe that the Doug Ford government is going to win the next election. And, we have to be ready to talk to them and convince them that 124 is not the answer and move on. And the rest of the stuff, it's very difficult for me to argue. And people getting an increase, even, folks at $20 an hour. But then again, Rocco makes a good point. The marketplace is the marketplace, and there's small business that get affected if, in fact, it moves too quickly. And I think you really got to assess the economics when you're making these kind of increases. And if they're incremental, it works. If it's too fast, it doesn't work. It actually has a negative effect on the economy.
Since I asked Lori, I should ask you as well. Does LiUNA intend to endorse any political party or candidate or leader formally?
We have endorsed Doug Ford.
There you go. It's on the record. Angela, your view on the NDP campaign offer for Labour?
Yeah, I think that the minimum wage plan in particular is really smart in terms of the economics of it. The research shows that the slow, gradual increase in the minimum wage allows businesses to plan. It also, as Lori said, puts money into workers' pockets, and they spend that in their local communities. So that's actually a really solid way to increase economic growth, is to put money in workers' pockets at that level. But I think beyond these promises, I think the issue that workers are really concerned about is affordability. They're concerned about housing prices. They're concerned about rent. They're concerned about the cost of healthcare and wait times in healthcare. And so I think that the NDP plan on all of these fronts is actually quite a bit better, especially in terms of, building not-for-profit affordable housing that creates jobs, that puts those LIUNA construction workers to work, and it gives us somewhere for people, somewhere to live that they can afford. And so all of these pieces, I think, the dental care, these are really important in terms of affordability. If you're thinking about public services, and being able to provide those services to people rather than them having to pay out of pocket, that makes life more affordable for people, and that is game changing for regional economies to grow and be stable and make it through. We don't know what's coming with the war in Ukraine and potentially a recession. So we want these types of investments that keep the economy stable as we're going forward.
And Angela, does CUPE intend to formally endorse any candidate or party in this election?
So I'm pretty sure, so I'm with CUPE National, so we wouldn't, but I'm pretty sure CUPE Ontario has reviewed the parties, had looked at the values that are expressed by each of the parties, and they're behind the NDP. Yeah.
Okay. Lori, let me do one last follow-up with you on this, and that is a couple of things. The NDP have made it a point to say gig workers ought to be included in some of the other benefits that go to other more permanent workers in society. And I guess I want your take on whether that goes far enough and whether the NDP minimum wage goes far enough, given that, I think it's $22 an hour is considered the living minimum wage in, for example, the city of Toronto. So, okay, you're endorsing the NDP, but do they go far enough for you in those two main areas?
Yeah, we do support the NDP. I think that there's always room to do better. We do support, we want people to have cost of living and to be able to have a living wage. However, we do have to get there in stages. So I support that this is the party that is going to help get us to where we need to be. I think with gig workers as well, any improvements are good improvements, and the NDP has the fastest track, I think, to represent these, not to represent, but to support these members in that process.
Okay, let's get the Liberal plan up next, please, Sheldon. Here is what the Liberal Party of Ontario has on offer in terms of labour. They would increase the minimum wage to $16 an hour, so a little bit beyond what the PCs are promising, create 150,000 jobs by getting 1.5 million new homes built, tackle the gender pay gap by requiring pay transparency, and test out this idea of a 4-day work week. A 4-day work week. Okay, pick on anything you like there, Rocco Rossi. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I just want to go back to something that was said earlier. I can't let it stand. Reducing the debate to we can't give money to people with yachts is really not helpful at all. Tens of thousands of small businesses went bankrupt over the last 2 years through no fault of their own. They've lost their houses. They've lost their mortgages. They've suffered through this. You've got hundreds of thousands of small, medium-sized businesses that have added almost $200,000 in debt over this period of time. So let's have a real debate. Let's have the full context. And this simple-minded characterization is really offensive.
Rocco, I have to say it's offensive as well to hear back what you're saying to me. Nowhere did I say all businesses. I spoke about those with yachts and those of the 1%.
Which are so small and are not the people that are being truly affected by the changes. So let's
never
make
said
sure
that,
we
Rocco.
have the full
Understand.
context.
I think both of you have made your points on this. Rocco, to the Liberal plan, what do you see that you like or don't like?
Well, one of the things that's quite interesting is on the minimum wage, what they're actually talking about, and they haven't provided any detail on it, but is to have regional variability because it understands that the cost of living is not the same in every part of the province. I'm not sure how that actually would work, but it's an intriguing notion. And the portable benefits piece is something that we're hearing really all of the parties begin to talk about. And that is something that I think that is very much worthy of study and look at how to make it work, because labor mobility is a key part of getting to a higher productivity in the economy. And so what you don't want is friction caused in the economy because people are worried, well, if I go to this, what happens, and are benefits covered, et cetera. So I think there's a case that can be built, but we'd like to see a lot more detail on that.
Okay, just to let everybody know, running out of time, so if you could keep your comments nice and economical, I'd appreciate it. Joe Mancinelli, on the Liberal plan, your view.
Well, I think it's a weak plan. There's nothing much that is significant in their plan. Part of the problem, too, is a matter of trust. You know, when it comes to the Liberals, and we saw this with the Wynne government and the Del Duca government, they don't stick to their word. And in fact, you know, they can even make it much better than they even have presented to us. And at the end of the day, it's a matter of trust. I'm not so sure I believe anything that they say. And at the end of their term, Del Duca was part of the movement to take jurisdiction away from LiUNA and hand it over to another organization. That is something so distasteful that, unfortunately, the 90,000 members we have and the 300,000 members of their families can't forget.
I'm glad you put that on the record, because people should understand that your union and Mr. Del Duca's former union, the Carpenters, also have a bit of history there. So, okay, there's that in place. Angela, your view on the Liberal plan?
Yeah, it looks nice. I think the issue is trust. There's Bill 115, where they interfered in collective bargaining with education workers. There's the fact that we had the fewest hospital beds per capita under this Liberal government. There's the fact that they haven't increased, Ontario Works or ODSP. They let it deflate to absolutely an abysmal level right now. So the history of that Liberal government isn't that far away. And we had to drag them kicking and screaming to increasing the minimum wage right at the end of that term. So any increases that there were or improvements for workers were really hard fought and were a result of the wins of the activists, I think, that fought for them.
Okay, I'm going to jump in there because I got to give Lori time. I got to give Lori time on this, and then we still got the Greens to go, and I'm running out of time. Go ahead, Lori.
Thanks. I think that it looks good on paper, but their track record speaks for themselves. I think that the pay gap and pay transparency, for example, why not have something more concrete about pay equity? That's what's really needed. Transparency is a step in it, but it doesn't go near far enough. I think that with this government that we've had previously, they, as I mentioned, their track record has shown that they're not for the workers and that they should not be in government either. I think that both the current government and the Liberals have shown that same message.
Okay, let's do one more round here, and this is the Green Party and what they're promising. And we give the Greens time because, of course, they had a seat in the last Parliament and are participating in the leaders' debate as well. And here we go. They've got candidates in all 124 ridings as well. Expand and invest in apprenticeship and training programs. Assess costs of low-carbon, clean economy transition on workers and business. Implement a basic income guarantee that the previous government brought in and the current government scrapped. And create jobs with green retrofit incentives for businesses. Joe Mancinelli, what do you like here, or what can't you live with here?
Well, you're talking to a leader of 90,000 construction workers where the Green Party has tried to take away their work through pipelines, through a number of energy projects as well. And so what can I say? It kind of speaks for itself. Look, I take offense where people say, hey, you guys construction workers only care about the jobs. Let me tell you, my members care about the environment as much as the Green Party. The Green Party should start looking at the effect of some of the policies that they introduce and how they affect people and working people in this province. And so if they're trying to court labor, they're doing a very poor job.
Lori, your view on the Green platform?
I think it's not substantial enough to know exactly what they're thinking on all fronts. Of course, I think that the environment is something that we should be having in mind, and we should be looking at how to do things differently in order to have a more green economy. But I think that some of their policies are questionable that we wouldn't be very supportive of. But I think that I need to see and hear more directly from them and have a more wholesome picture.
Angela.
Yeah, historically, the Green Party doesn't have a great relationship with unions or workers. I personally have worked over the past 8 years around a just transitions, so I support some of the stuff that they're putting forward, but I'm not sure that they've thought about it fully from a worker's perspective. And so I'd be happy to have conversations with them to help guide them along that path. But yes, I think we need to be making investments in climate infrastructure and creating good green jobs for workers, good green unionized jobs for workers.
Rocco, the leader of the Green Party, Mike Schreiner, is a former small businessman himself. What do you think he's got on offer here that you like or don't like?
Look, it's impossible to dislike Mike Schreiner as an individual. He's high energy and a one-man band. There is a lot of missing details simply because they don't have the resources that the other parties have. I absolutely take Joe's point. I really think there is not sufficient thought given to what transition looks like and making sure that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater as long as we're moving along. So I think saying that, he has to look into that is right. And I love more on apprenticeship and skills, because I think that is crucial to increasing productivity and increasing opportunity, not just for our young people, but people mid-career to retrain and upskill. Those things are important, but there is a lot of detail missing in the transition to make sure it's both just and sustainable from an economic standpoint.
Okay, I got 10 seconds left to ask Joe Mancinelli, who pronounced the name of his union LiUNA. But when your daughter was on this program a few months ago, she pronounced it LiUNA. Who's right, Joe?
I think we're both right. I'm not going to argue with my daughter.
Well said, like a proud papa. Okay, well done. That's Joe Mancinelli from LiUNA, or LiUNA, however you want to say it, Laborers International Union of North America. Angela McEwen from CUPE, Rocco Rossi from the Ontario Chamber of Commerce, Lori Nanskaville, OPSEU. Thanks all four of you for appearing on the agenda tonight.
Thank you.
Great.
Thank
you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.